Prepare to be gripped by the tale of Mila, a woman whose life was shattered by dark forces beyond her control. From the moment she crossed paths with Ricardo, her world descended into chaos. But amidst the darkness, there is a glimmer of hope. Join us as we delve into the depths of Mila's struggle for survival and uncover the truth behind the sinister forces that threatened to consume her soul. I was 25 years old when this happened and was in the prime of my life. Suddenly, Ricardo came into my life, who chased after me every day. From texting to calling to secretly driving by and watching if he happened to see me. Sometimes I made plans with him to do something fun, but on the agreed day, I suddenly didn't contact him at all. The reason I didn't reach out is that Ricardo was friends with some guys from the area. I was so afraid that if he and I had done something, those guys would know. You know how men are among themselves. They like to talk tough. Months went by, and he kept chasing after me. Somewhere, I found his attention enjoyable, but I still doubted whether I should do something fun with him or just meet him briefly somewhere. One day, I had to pick up money for my father, but my regular taxi driver was unreachable. I had to be there on time because the place would close in an hour. At that moment, I saw Ricardo as my only option, since he liked me and really wanted to be with me. Mind you, I had never asked him before or done anything fun. I just saw him as an option now. I called him, and with a very happy voice, he agreed to pick me up. Believe me, he lives in the south, and I in the north. Yet he was there in no time. The moment Ricardo arrived, and I got into the car, my heart started pounding heavily, as if this had long been meant to be, as if I was supposed to be next to him for a long time. By the way he talked and acted, I noticed that I had formed a different image of this man. I had so many prejudices about him, but maybe that was because of fear, and because I didn't know him that well yet. I felt so happy that day because he had a nice vibe. The connection between us was immediate and somewhere. I felt those butterflies fluttering in my stomach. Ricardo dropped me off at home again after I had taken care of my business, very polite and gentle. We said goodbye nicely and ended with a kiss. I went to sleep and woke up in the evening without a text or anything from him. I went to the store, and who suddenly drove next to me? Ricardo. I became happy again, and my heart started pounding again. I got in, and we drove around the city a few times. We talked nicely about ourselves, and I really felt at home with him. From that day on, we were a couple. I know, it went very fast between us, but it felt right, as if it was just meant to be. It went smoothly as I wanted, and I felt like the happiest woman ever. Ricardo and I had a good life. We went out to eat more often, and I received more gifts. He eventually came to talk to my parents. They were satisfied with him because they also saw how happy I was. And in no time, Ricardo and I were living together. Ricardo has 3 previous children. They were all girls, with 3 different women. From his last ex, Rachel, I had a lot of trouble. She couldn't handle that he had moved on with his life, while she had initially thanked him. Rachel was like a tiger. She sought all kinds of ways to disrupt our relationship. She wrote all sorts of mean things about me on social media, or when she saw us on the street, she started yelling ugly things at us. Ricardo wanted a son, since he only had daughters. We planned it, and within 2 months, it happened. was pregnant. We were so happy with the news, especially me, since it was my first child. Ricardo strongly believed that we would have a boy, he said. My love for you is pure, and I believe you will give me what I want. After a few days, my life changed completely. Ricardo was still sweet, but from time to time, I was abused for the strangest things. I call it abuse because I had bruises. I was pulled out of bed and fell to the ground, and he kept hitting me. It seemed like he just had no pity and went crazy. When I screamed that I would go to the police, I was only abused even more. After such abuse, he would give me a gift as an apology and a sorry, and suddenly, he was very sorry. I started to suspect that he might be up to something outside, because we were not in a money crisis, so it must be something else. But as usual, Mr. always knew how to express himself nicely, always had an answer ready, knew how to defend himself and kept denying, which made me believe him again and again. Once, during my pregnancy, we went out a bit. On my toes, in the car, I kept feeling something that irritated me. It kept going until I turned on the flashlight of my phone to check. It was one long, straight thread of a fake hair wrapped around my toes. When I confronted him, he swore he didn't know how it got there. First, he said it was my hair. My hair is curly, and I don't wear fake hair. I left it at that, but I kept my eye on him because I started to have my doubts. Once, I secretly investigated his phone and saw a picture of a woman. She was facing away in the photo, and she had a very long fake hair. So, I assumed it must be this woman from whom the thread wrapped around my toes came. Again, he denied it. He said she was a woman he knew well. She had to do something for him by mail. We argued, but ultimately, I left it again because I was pregnant and didn't want to exert myself too much. I gave birth to a boy. Yes, what he wanted, a boy. Suddenly, it seemed calm between us again until he suddenly had to go to another country for 4 days after my second week of delivery when I was at my weakest point. I didn't know with whom or for what reason he had to go there. This was not something he was used to do, so I found it very strange. When he arrived there, I couldn't reach him after a certain time, and that raised suspicions that caused us to have small fights again. Once, I went to visit my mother with my baby, feeling stressed about the situation. Ricardo called to check on me, but because I was angry, I told him I would find another man who would accept me and my baby and treat us well. When I arrived home that day, Ricardo was already waiting for me outside the gate, which I found very strange. Normally, he would just be inside. As I got out of the car and approached him, he started talking to me very sternly, saying how much he loves me and all. He put both hands on my shoulders, pushed me down and said, "You and I are not separating, and if you have another man in your life, you both have a big problem. You belong to me." Weeks passed with arguments. My husband, Ricardo, had completely changed, no longer as loving as before. I could hardly recognize him in terms of behavior. He barely looked at me. Attention was lacking. He came home later more often, despite us having a newborn baby at home. Our child was barely 1 month old when Ricardo came home late again. I confronted him and found this unacceptable. His response was, "Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, the first thing you should do is pack your things and go back to your parents. Then I won't have to consider you." I couldn't believe what I heard. so I didn't say anything further because this was obviously not what I wanted. I loved this man. He was the love of my life, my first husband, the father of my first child. When the next morning came, he looked at me angrily and said, "You know what you have to do, right?" People. I packed with a heavy heart. Emotionless, he watched as I cried and gathered everything together. I moved back to my parents. It was a difficult time for my son and me, as I wasn't working at the time. So financially, it was tough. I couldn't always rely on my parents because my father was the breadwinner. My mom was sickly and couldn't work because of it. Ricardo occasionally came by because we weren't definitively separated. For him, we just didn't live together. But he still tried to control me every day. And you guessed it, I became pregnant again after a few months. Initially, we had planned our family. We would have 2 kids in a row, so they would grow up together, and I wouldn't have to rush later. People, this pregnancy didn't go well either. Suddenly, I couldn't hear from Ricardo again. He didn't invite me to live together again. He had moved from the place where we stayed together to a place where his address was unknown to me. He didn't take care of our son, didn't come to see me during that pregnancy, as if he didn't care at all. God, I was so unhappy, crying all the time and worrying a lot. One day, Ricardo called very early. I was fed up with this life. I cried on the phone and asked him to give our relationship another chance because we would soon have 2 children together, and it wasn't healthy for them. I couldn't believe what I heard. "Mila, I'm already looking for another woman. You're no good for me. The only good thing about you is that you bear my children. If you feel horny with this pregnancy, you can fuck another man. I won't even get angry because you won't be the first woman to do this." And then he rudely hung up on me. Exactly after 3 days, I couldn't feel my baby anymore. No movements, no kicks. It was just silent in my belly. I was already in the 6th month. One side of my belly was terribly hard. I became nervous and had severe abdominal pain. I asked my neighbor to take me to the hospital because I wanted to be sure what was exactly going on. On the way to the hospital, my water broke in my neighbor's car. I saw a lot of blood and water. I still felt something hanging from my vagina, but because of the pain and fear, I couldn't feel or look. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor treated me immediately. What was hanging from my vagina was my baby's umbilical cord. The doctor told me that the cord was no longer pulsating, so my baby showed no signs of life. People, I was completely confused. I screamed out, "My baby, my girl, I had lost her." She was already fully formed and was a copy of her dad. People, I called Ricardo crying and told him what happened. He only shouted on the phone and hung up on me. I lay in the hospital for 5 days. He never came to visit me or called to ask how I was doing. I lay there sunk in sorrow and pain. When I was discharged, I had to bury my baby after 2 days. Yes, these babies don't come between the legs of elders. Ricardo never came. I only buried my child. I have never felt so alone and abandoned. I went through so much pain and emotions alone. While I heard from Ricardo's cousin how he was spending time with another lady, he had gone out the same night. The death of his child seemed to mean nothing to him. I was disappointed, sad, and broken. How could Ricardo do this? Right after the funeral, I started having strange dreams in which women were fighting with me. I dreamed of many babies in my bedroom. Ricardo's cousin let me know that the new lady he was with was named LaToya. Since my first pregnancy, he had been involved with this girl. And during our relationship, he secretly opened a business for her. I was once again very broken because he did nothing for me to earn extra income. He didn't even think about the benefits it would bring to his children if I had my own income. Despite LaToya getting everything from Ricardo, she started sending me all sorts of text messages in the rudest way, telling me that I should no longer contact Ricardo and that she had taken him away from me. And if I were to chase after him, my genitals would rot. She would make sure of that. She also just casually let me know. Black Horror Stories members, weeks went by. I became dry, super skinny, didn't look healthy anymore. I woke up regularly with large bruises all over my body, as if someone had beaten me up badly. I turned dark in color. Very strange to see the grayish color I had. Once I was bathing my son and suddenly felt a cold wind pass by me towards my boy. From that moment on, my boy became completely stiff. He turned blue and his eyes became completely white. I ran to the neighbor, who in turn took me to the hospital. The doctor admitted my child and said he was having seizures. I didn't believe much of that because I know what I felt this was black magic's work. Ricardo visited him once. He wasn't even 10 mins in his room, and LaToya already called him. I don't know what they discussed, but he left without saying a word and never came to see his son again. Weeks, months, years passed. I became sicker, thinner, stressed, and suddenly started smoking marijuana to calm down. My body became increasingly bruised. It was clear to me that something unknown was draining me, but I didn't know the details of the situation. Meanwhile, LaToya kept sending threatening text messages, making me even sicker. I also fell into a trance. I felt stabbing pains all over my body, as if someone were pricking me with needles. In my belly, I felt as if a baby were kicking. In my vagina, I felt movements as if a snake were crawling inside. I just couldn't sit still. I continued to have intense and particularly frightening dreams. There was knocking on my windows in the evening, but when I looked, there was no one there. I saw shadows passing by in my bedroom and couldn't explain it. I worried even more and continued to deteriorate. One time, I screamed in my sleep at 3 a.m. as if possessed. But when I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. Another time, I was walking down the street when I entered a trance and started screaming as if my whole body was on fire, which made me short of breath. A gentleman who happened to be nearby rushed to me and rubbed palm oil over my body. He blew cigar smoke in my face, and I collapsed as if a heavy burden had been lifted from me. One evening, my son suddenly started talking nonsense. He also said there was a little man in the room who kept scaring him. My son began hitting his own head with his fists and screamed in pain all evening. My neighbor came and applied some traditional medicine to him, which helped him fall asleep a little later. That's when I was 100% sure that something was seriously wrong with both of us. There was something seriously wrong in our lives, which made me very anxious. The next day, my neighbor took us to a man who specialized in cultural practices. From the moment we arrived, that man knew that something was wrong with us. He gave me a special potion to drink. What I vomited shortly thereafter, were things I had never seen before. It was terrible to witness. That cultural practitioner prepared to give us a spiritual cleansing. And so, it was done. Since my son and I underwent the cleansing, things have been going very well for us. Much better up to this day. I shine again. I feel lighter. I have people around me who love me and pamper me. Financially, things are excellent. I found my dream job just 3 days after the cleansing. I have jewelry again. I can save money again. My son goes to school nicely and is very brave. That voodoo priest did his job very well. I am very satisfied with his work. Later, I found out that Ricardo had been using dark forces on me since our first meeting. Hence, why my heart raced so much for him. His intention was to tie me, and so it happened. Even that day when he was waiting for me at the gate and placed his hands on my shoulders, he was busy binding me through some ritual, tying me with dark intentions. Yes, indeed, people. Men also engage in these devilish practices. Don't underestimate this. It's not just women who tie men. And I became ill because, since my first pregnancy, Ricardo was involved with Latoya, who in turn was also involved in dark magic. She sent a malevolent spirit to destroy me completely so that she could enjoy all my husband's money. The idea that I might benefit financially from him drove her to desperation. She wanted everything. All his money had to be hers, and I was in her way. That's why she sent that malevolent spirit to me, because I had to be ruined and removed. But sorry for her, God had other plans. I am still alive. Since I underwent the cleansing, their lives have completely gone to hell. Yes, what's good for me is good for you. Latoya was involved in an accident where she nearly died. Now she experiences what I went through. Ricardo abuses her constantly out of frustration because he no longer earns large amounts like before. That was my story. My child and I are very happy now. He is 5 years old, and I am 30 years old. Men, be careful who you share your bed with, because certain women come to destroy you. They want to enjoy your hard-earned money and destroy your family through dark practices.